The plains stretched endlessly, golden under the late afternoon sun. Dust rose from the hooves of cattle as they shuffled back toward the ranch, their low calls echoing through the quiet valley. At the edge of it all, leaning against a weathered fence post, stood rancher Caleb McGraw, a man whose name carried weight across the county. To his neighbors, he was the kind of man who built his world with calloused hands, iron will, and sheer endurance. But to himself, in the stillness of evenings like this, he was a man carrying a burden far heavier than the herds grazing his fields. Caleb had known loss. It had come sudden, sharp, and cruel 3 winters ago when sickness swept through his household. His wife, a woman of soft laughter and steady faith, had been taken in just a matter of days. No doctor's tonic, no desperate prayer could save her. And when the winter snows melted, they left behind not only his aching heart, but also a little girl, his daughter, Sarah, who looked at him with eyes far too old for her years. The rancher loved his daughter fiercely, but he was no gentle man. His days began before sunrise, stretching long into the night, filled with branding, trading, and endless decisions that kept the ranch alive. Words of comfort never came easy to him. He could mend a fence, tame a horse, or bargain a fair price at the stockyard, but soothing a child's loneliness. That was a skill he lacked. And so, silence grew in the McGraw household. Silence at the supper table, silence in the big drafty rooms of the ranch house where once a woman's touch had made everything warm and inviting. Caleb would sit at the head of the table, shoulders square, staring into his plate, while Sarah sat across, her tiny hands folded neatly, saying little more than, "Yes, Pa." It wasn't that he didn't care. No. His heart burned every time he caught her staring wistfully at the empty chair where her mother used to sit. But what could he give her? He knew cattle, not comfort. He knew the land, not the tenderness a child craved. And so, the rancher bore his burden in silence, the crushing guilt of failing his daughter while also failing himself. The men who worked his land respected him, but none dared cross the walls he had built around his grief. In town, whispers followed him. Some called him proud, others pitied him as a man broken but too stubborn to bend. But Caleb cared little for gossip. His world was work and survival, until at times the sound of his daughter crying alone at night pierced through his walls like a knife. He'd walk the halls then, boots heavy on the wooden floor, pausing outside her door. He wanted to go in, to sit at her bedside, to tell her it would be all right, but the words stuck like dry dust in his throat. He would turn away every time, his heart heavier than before, and so, day after day, Caleb lived in that endless cycle, tending to the land by daylight, wrestling with his failures by night. To the outside world, he was a strong rancher, a man who needed no one. But inside, he was a father afraid of love, afraid of failing again, afraid of letting anyone close enough to tear down the walls he thought protected him. It was in this state of weary solitude that fate began to stir. For the ranch that carried his name and the daughter who carried his heart could not survive on silence and hard labor alone, and soon enough a stranger would arrive. One who would shake the very foundations of Caleb McGraw's carefully guarded world. The sun had just begun its climb when Caleb McGraw rode back from the south pasture, dust clinging to his hat brim and coat. His horse, a broad-chested bay, snorted as they trotted up the long dirt road leading to the ranch house. Caleb was bone-tired, but what he saw waiting on his porch pulled him upright in the saddle. A wagon stood there, an old wooden cart, its wheels worn from miles of travel. Beside it stood a woman, her hands folded neatly before her, her figure straight, despite the weariness etched into her face. She couldn't have been more than 25, yet sorrow clung to her like a second skin. Caleb slowed his horse. His daughter, Sarah, peeked shyly from behind the porch rail, her braids blowing in the morning breeze. The woman turned her eyes toward him then, steady, clear eyes that carried their own kind of strength. "Mr. McGraw?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Caleb dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the dirt. He removed his hat out of habit, studying her with the guarded look of a man unaccustomed to surprises. "That'd be me," he said. "And you are?" "Anna Whitfield, sir. Widow Whitfield." She gave the words with a calmness that made them heavier than if she had shouted them. "I was told you might be looking for help, someone to cook, keep house, tend to what needs tending." Caleb frowned slightly. He hadn't asked for anyone. Still, he remembered a brief conversation at the general store a week past, when Mrs. Abernathy, the town busybody, had clucked her tongue at him and said, "You need a woman in that house, Caleb, not for you, but for that little girl of yours." He'd brushed her off then, but perhaps she had taken it upon herself to arrange this. "You travel far?" Caleb asked. "From Dodge," Anna answered. "It was all I could do after my husband passed." Her hands tightened around, the shawl at her shoulders. "I've worked in kitchens. I can sew, and I don't shy from chores. I just need a place, Mr. McGraw. A chance." Caleb's gaze flickered to Sarah. The little girl was watching Anna with wide eyes, half hidden, behind the porch post. Something in her expression gave Caleb pause. It wasn't fear. It was yearning. The child hadn't looked at anyone that way in a long time. Still, Caleb's instinct was to keep distance. The ranch was no place for strangers, least of all for a woman with her own troubles. But before he could answer, Anna stepped closer, her voice steady though her shoes were coated in dust. "I'm not here for charity," she said. "I'll earn my keep. If it doesn't suit you, I'll move along." Silence stretched between them. The wind stirred the tall grass, the cattle lowed in the distance, and the child's small hand gripped the porch rail tighter. Caleb studied. Anna one moment longer, then gave a curt nod. "All right, then," he said gruffly. "There's room enough. You'll cook for the house, keep it in order. Wages ain't much, but you'll have a roof." Relief flickered in Anna's eyes, though. She held her composure. She turned her gaze to Sarah, and for the first time in a long while, the little girl smiled, just faintly, but enough to make Caleb's chest tighten. That night, the ranch house smelled of fresh bread and stew instead of dust and silence. Caleb ate quietly, as always, but Sarah's laughter rang across the table when Anna told her a story about her journey. Caleb sat in his usual place, listening, his face stern, though his hands stilled on the knife he held. For the first time, in years, the house didn't feel empty. And though Caleb would never admit it, a small voice in his heart whispered that perhaps this widow's arrival was not chance at all, but the beginning of something neither he nor his daughter could yet understand. The ranch house had begun to change. Where once the rooms echoed with silence, now there were sounds of life, dishes clattering, the hum of a woman's voice as she worked in the kitchen, the faint creak of a rocking chair on the porch in the evenings. Anna Whitfield had not been there long, yet her presence had filled the emptiness in ways Caleb hadn't expected. For Sarah, the change was even greater. The little girl, who had grown used to speaking only in short answers and whispers, now found herself drawn to the widow's side like a shadow. She would sit at the kitchen table, chin resting on her small hands, watching as Anna kneaded bread or chopped vegetables. Anna never scolded her for lingering or told her to run along. Instead, she would smile, sometimes humming softly, sometimes telling stories about the towns she had passed through on her long journey. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Sarah asked in a small voice, "Miss Anna, did you ever have a little girl like me?" The question caught Anna mid-stitch. She looked down at her hands, her needle frozen above the fabric. "No, child," she said gently. "God didn't bless me that way." Her voice softened. "But I always thought I might like one." Sarah's heart swelled at the answer. She edged closer, her small hand slipping into Anna's without hesitation. From that moment on, the bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Yet, beneath Sarah's laughter and smiles, a deeper truth lingered. The girl still carried the weight of loneliness, the kind only a child who had lost her mother could know. She loved Anna's kindness, the way she brushed her hair at night or tucked her in with gentle words, but there was always the fear that one day Anna might leave, like her mother had. At times, Sarah would wake in the middle of the night, tiptoe to the widow's room and stand in the doorway just to make sure she was still there. Anna, half asleep, would beckon her closer, wrapping the child in her arms until sleep returned. Caleb noticed these things in silence. He would stand in the doorway after long days in the fields, watching as Anna bent over Sarah's schoolbook, patiently helping her with words and numbers. He would hear Sarah's giggles echo through the halls when Anna braided her hair or taught her to bake biscuits. Those sounds cut him deep, half joy, half guilt. Joy, because his daughter was laughing again. Guilt, because it was another woman, not him, who gave her the comfort she needed. One Sunday afternoon, Sarah tried to climb into Caleb's lap while he sat on the porch sharpening his knife. It had been years since she had done such a thing. For a moment, Caleb stiffened, unsure of how to respond. His rough hands, so used to leather and steel, felt clumsy against her small frame. But before he could speak, Anna stepped onto the porch, carrying a tray of lemonade. Sarah slipped down and ran to her instead, curling up beside her skirts. Caleb's jaw tightened as he watched. He wanted to call her back, to tell her that she didn't need to run from him. But the words never came. He only lowered his eyes and resumed his work, the scrape of steel against stone louder than it needed to be. Sarah's loneliness was no longer the hollow silence it had been before Anna arrived. It had changed. Now it was a fear, a desperate plea unspoken, "Don't leave me, stay, be the mother I lost." She clung to Anna with all the hope a child's heart could muster, never realizing that her quiet plea would soon be spoken aloud, and it would shake Caleb McGraw's world to its core. Evenings at the McGraw Ranch had taken on a new rhythm. Where silence once ruled, the clink of cutlery and the warmth of conversation now softened the air. Anna always made supper with care, stew rich with flavor, biscuits golden at the edges, sometimes even pie if she had the means. The house smelled alive again, and Caleb, though he rarely said a word, noticed. He would sit at the head of the table, broad shoulders squared, his face carved in that familiar sternness. Across from him sat Sarah, her hair neatly braided, cheeks flushed from helping Anna in the kitchen. Beside her, Anna herself would serve the food, smiling faintly whenever Sarah told one of her little stories. It was during these suppers that Sarah began to watch her father more closely. She noticed the way he never laughed, how he would answer Anna with nods or a few quiet words, as if speaking too much cost him something he couldn't spare. At first, Sarah thought little of it. Her father had always been that way. But as she grew fonder of Anna, a quiet fear began to stir in her heart. One evening, when the lamps were lit and the wind rattled against the windows, Sarah set down her spoon and looked between them. Caleb was focused on his plate, while Anna poured him more coffee. The girl's voice trembled when she spoke. "Pa," she said softly, "is Miss Anna staying with us? Forever?" The question froze the air. Caleb's hand paused on his cup. Anna glanced at him, unsure whether to answer. Caleb cleared his throat, his voice low. "She's here to help us for a while." A while. The words struck Sarah like a blow. Her little hands tightened around her napkin. She lowered her eyes. But Anna, sensing the child's hurt, reached over and brushed her cheek gently. "Don't you worry, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere just yet." But the reassurance did little to calm Sarah's heart. That night, as the fire crackled and shadows danced along the walls, she crept into Anna's room once more. Curling up at the foot of the bed, she whispered the fear that had been growing inside her. "I don't want you to leave, Miss Anna. If you have to go, take me with you. Don't leave me here all alone." Anna's breath caught. She reached for the child, pulling her close. "Oh, darling," she murmured, "you're not alone. You've got your pa. He loves you more than anything." But Sarah only shook her, head against her shoulder. "He doesn't say it. He doesn't smile. He just sits there. What if one day he sends you away?" Her small voice cracked. "Take me instead of you, Miss Anna. Please." Anna's heart ached at the plea. She kissed the girl's brow, whispering comfort until her sobs quieted and sleep took her. Yet even as she held the child, Anna's mind raced. She had come to this ranch seeking refuge, a roof over her head and honest work to keep her alive. But now she saw she was more than just a cook or housekeeper. To Sarah, she was an anchor, a fragile promise of love the child desperately needed. What Anna did not see was Caleb, standing just beyond the doorway, the lamplight casting his shadow across the floor. He had come to check on the voices, but what he heard rooted him in place. "Take me instead." Those words pierced deeper than any wound he had ever known. His jaw tightened, and though he turned away before Anna could see him, his heart thundered with the weight of his daughter's plea. He returned to his room in silence, but sleep did not come to him that night. For the first time in years, Caleb McGraw was forced to confront the truth. His silence, his distance, had left his daughter so desperate that she feared losing the fur. Only comfort she had found. And though he said nothing at supper the next day, the burden on his shoulders grew heavier than ever before. The days that followed carried a strange heaviness. Anna continued her work with quiet grace, baking bread in the mornings, mending shirts by the firelight, teaching Sarah her letters in the afternoons, but beneath the surface, she felt the weight of the child's words pressing on her heart. "Take me instead." Caleb, too, carried the burden. He had not spoken of that night, nor let on that he'd overheard his daughter's whisper. Yet something in his manner grew tighter. He rose earlier, worked later, kept his eyes fixed on the land, as though the endless horizon could distract him from the storm building inside. But Sarah noticed everything. Children often do. She saw the lines of worry deepen on her father's face. She felt the way Anna tried to comfort her without mentioning the subject again. The silence between them all grew, thick and suffocating. It came to a breaking point one evening at supper. The table was set with roast chicken and potatoes, the aroma filling the room. Anna moved gracefully, serving Caleb first, then Sarah. The child sat quietly, her small fingers twisting the hem of her dress. Caleb muttered a thank you, his voice gruff, and began to eat. For a few minutes, the only sound was the scrape of forks against plates. Then Sarah set down her fork, her little chin trembling. She looked straight at her father, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. "Pa," she whispered, barely audible, "if you're going to send Miss Anna away, can you take me instead?" The words shattered the silence like a gunshot. Caleb froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Anna's hand trembled so that the spoon she held clattered against the bowl. "Sarah," Anna began softly, "darling, don't—" But the girl pressed on, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, Pa, don't let her go. She makes the house feel alive again. She makes me laugh. She makes it feel like Mama's still here somehow." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. "If she has to leave, take me instead. I don't want to stay here without her." Anna's eyes blurred with tears as she reached for the child, pulling her into her arms. "Hush, sweet girl," she murmured, stroking her hair. But Sarah clung to her with both arms, sobbing into her shoulder. Caleb sat rooted in place, his chest burning. Every word his daughter spoke cut deeper than the last. He had always believed his silence was strength, that by not showing weakness, he was protecting her. But in truth, his silence had made her feel abandoned, unloved, replaceable. Anna lifted her gaze to Caleb then, her own eyes fierce through the tears. "Mr. McGraw," she said, her voice trembling yet steady, "your daughter is begging for love she should never have to beg for. She doesn't need me instead of you. She needs both of us. She needs her father to see her, to tell her what she means to him." The rancher's jaw clenched. Words rose in his throat, but years of silence bound them tight. He looked at his daughter, her small frame shaking with sobs, her arms wrapped desperately around the widow as though she might disappear if she let go. Caleb lowered his fork with a heavy hand. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. His lips pressed into a hard line, his silence louder than any shout. And in that silence, the little girl's plea hung in the air, trembling, unanswered. Anna rocked, Sarah gently, her own tears falling into the child's hair. Across the table, Caleb's face remained a mask of stone, but inside something had cracked wide open. The rancher's silence that night stretched far beyond the supper table. After Sarah had cried herself to sleep in Anna's arms, Caleb retreated. To his study, a dim room lined with ledgers and maps of the ranch. The fire burned low, casting shadows across the worn leather chair where he sat, elbows on his knees, head bowed. His daughter's words echoed inside him. "If you're going to send Miss Anna away, can you take me instead?" Caleb had weathered storms, outlaws, droughts, and the harsh winters of the plains, but nothing had ever struck him like those words. He had always thought himself a man of strength, measured, steady, unshaken, yet in his silence, he had built walls so high that even his own child thought she might be left behind. The shame of it gnawed at him. He replayed the image in his mind, Sarah's tears, her little arms clinging to Anna as though she were a lifeline. And then Anna's voice, gentle but sharp, cutting through his defenses. "She doesn't need me instead of you. She needs both of us." Caleb leaned back in the chair, dragging a hand across his face. He had wanted to speak, to tell Sarah she was wrong, that he would never send her away, that she was the only reason he'd kept going after her mother passed. But the words had choked in his throat. Years of holding his heart behind locked doors had left him unable to open them, even when his child needed it most. For the next several days, Caleb buried himself in work. He rode out before dawn, checking fence lines, branding calves, trading at the stockyard. He spoke little, even less than usual, as though the weight of silence had doubled. To the ranch hands, he looked like the same hard man as always. But inside, something shifted. At night, he found himself pausing outside Sarah's door. He would hear Anna reading softly, her voice carrying through the crack of the door, stories of faraway places, heroes, and hope. Sarah's giggles would sometimes follow, lighter now, though tinged with a desperate need to hold on. Caleb would stand there, listening, a lump in his throat. One night, after Anna's lamp had gone dark, he pushed the door open a crack. Sarah was asleep, clutching a rag doll close to her chest. In the faint moonlight, she looked so small, so fragile, her tear-stained cheeks still pink. Caleb's hand gripped the door frame. He wanted to step inside, to kneel beside her bed, to whisper what had been trapped inside him for years. "I love you, Sarah. I'll never let you go." But the words stayed locked within him. His boots remained rooted to the floor. After a long moment, he closed the door quietly and walked away. In the kitchen, Anna sat alone, her sewing abandoned on the table. She looked up when Caleb entered, her eyes steady, searching. He said nothing, only poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, staring into the dark. The silence between them was thick, filled with everything he could not say. Finally, Anna spoke, her voice low but resolute. "You can't keep shutting her out, Mr. McGraw. She won't stop needing you just because you don't know how to show it. She's your daughter, not your ranch. You can't fix her heart with silence." Caleb's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her she didn't understand, that words didn't come easy to men like him, that survival had always been about action, not talk. But when he turned, Anna's eyes held his, fierce and unyielding. And for the first time, he had no answer. That night, when Caleb finally lay in bed, his sleep was restless. The walls he had built to protect himself now felt like a prison. His silence, once his armor, had become his greatest burden. And though he had not yet spoken a word, in the quiet of his heart, he knew something had to change. The days rolled on, each one heavy with unspoken words. Caleb carried his silence like a saddle he could not take off, but something in him was loosening, bit by bit. Though he still struggled to say what weighed on his heart, his actions began to change in small, almost unnoticeable ways. It began one morning when Sarah followed Anna out to the chicken coop. The child's laughter rang through the air as she tried and failed to catch a hen. Caleb, walking back from the barn, paused to watch. Normally, he would have moved on without a word, but this time he set down his tools and strode over. "Hold your arms out like this," he said gruffly, showing Sarah how to corner the bird without frightening it. Sarah blinked in surprise. Her father rarely explained things beyond work on the ranch. She mimicked him, and soon enough the hen was nestled in her arms, her smile stretched wide, brighter than the morning sun. Caleb looked at her, really looked, and though no words of praise left his lips, Sarah felt something shift between them. That evening, when supper was done, Caleb lingered at the table instead of retreating to his study. Anna read aloud from a book by the fire, Sarah leaning against her side. Caleb listened quietly, one hand resting on the arm of his chair, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. It seemed such a simple thing, but for Sarah, his presence meant more than she could say. The turning point came a few nights later, when a summer storm rolled in across the plains. The wind howled, rattling the windows, thunder booming so loud it shook the very walls of the house. Sarah, woken from sleep, ran into Anna's room trembling. Anna wrapped her arms around her, whispering comfort, but Sarah's tears would not stop. Without thinking, Anna carried her into the main room where Caleb sat by the fire, boots still on, staring into the storm. The moment Sarah saw him, she broke from Anna's arms and ran straight to her father. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing, her small hands gripping his shirt. Caleb froze, his heart thundering louder than the storm outside. For a split second, instinct urged him to pull away, to retreat behind the walls he had built. But then something inside him broke, like a dam giving way. Slowly, awkwardly, he wrapped his arms around her. His calloused hands rested against her trembling back, and he held her. "It's all right," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "Ain't nothing out there gonna hurt you. Not while I'm here." Anna stood silently by the fire, her eyes glistening. Sarah, soothed by his embrace, pressed her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not just with Anna, but with her father. When Sarah finally fell asleep in his arms, Caleb carried her to bed, tucking her in with a gentleness he hadn't known he possessed. He lingered at her bedside, a long moment, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The words hovered on his tongue. "I love you, Sarah, but they stayed unspoken. Still, the way he looked at her spoke volumes more than his silence ever had. Later, in the quiet of the kitchen, Anna met him with a look that held both gratitude and challenge. "See what happens when you let her in?" she whispered. Caleb didn't reply, but for the first time there was no resistance in his eyes. Only a quiet acknowledgement of his daughter's need, of Anna's truth, and of the changes stirring in his own heart. The storm passed, leaving the ranch washed clean, under the stars, and though Caleb had said little, the night marked a turning point, not just for Sarah, but for the rancher himself. The days after the storm felt different on the McGraw ranch. The land was fresh, washed clean by rain, and so too was something. Inside Caleb, though he could not name it, Sarah was lighter, brighter, clinging less in fear and more in joy. She still spent every waking moment at Anna's side, but she looked at her father differently now. Her eyes no longer held that deep worry that she might be left behind. When Caleb entered a room, she smiled. Sometimes she even tugged at his sleeve, eager to show him her drawings or the biscuits she had baked with Anna. Caleb did not always know what to do, but he found himself trying. He lingered at the table after supper instead of retreating into his silence. He asked Sarah questions about her lessons, fumbling through her answers with awkward nods and half smiles. And though he still couldn't speak the words in his heart, he felt Sarah leaning closer to him day by day. But it wasn't just Sarah who was changing him. It was Anna. He saw her everywhere, in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up as she kneaded dough. In the garden, her skirt brushing the soil as she pulled weeds. In the evenings, sitting by the fire with Sarah nestled against her shoulder, her voice weaving stories into the air. She had come to his ranch a widow, a stranger in need of refuge. Yet now, she was the reason the house felt alive again. One evening, Caleb returned late from the pastures, mud on his boots, sweat on his brow. The sun was sinking low, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. As he approached the house, he paused. Through the open window, he heard laughter, Anna's gentle, Sarah's bright, blending like music he hadn't known he was missing. He stood there a long while, listening. His throat tightened with something he didn't understand, longing, gratitude, perhaps even hope. For so long he had believed himself broken beyond repair, a man unfit for tenderness. But Anna's presence had proved him wrong. She hadn't tried to tear down his walls. She had simply filled the empty spaces until, without realizing it, he'd started to lower them himself. That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Caleb found Anna in the kitchen, wiping down the table. The lamplight cast a warm glow across her face, softening the weariness in her eyes. She looked up when he entered, her hands stilling on the rag. "Long day?" she asked. Caleb grunted, setting his hat on the peg by the door. "Always is." She studied him for a moment, then returned to her work. The silence stretched, heavy but not hostile. Caleb shifted, his boots scuffing against the floor. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "You didn't have to stay this long." Anna's hands stilled again. She lifted her eyes, meeting his. "I know. You could have found work in town, easier than this place. I know that too," she said softly. "But Sarah needed me." Her words struck him like a hammer, simple, honest, undeniable. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I reckon she did," he admitted, his voice rough. Anna's expression softened. "She still does, but she needs you more." Caleb had no answer. He only nodded once, then turned toward the door. But as he left, her words followed him, lodging deep in his chest. That night, lying awake in the stillness of his room, Caleb finally admitted to himself what he had resisted for so long. Sarah wasn't the only one Anna had saved. She had breathed life back into his house, into his child, and into him. And for the first time in years, Caleb McGraw wondered if he could allow himself to hope again. Summer bled into autumn on the McGraw ranch, the fields turning gold beneath the harvest sun. The air was cooler, the days shorter, yet inside the house, warmth lingered where once there had been only shadows. Caleb felt the change in small ways. He no longer stood outside Sarah's door at night. He walked in. At first, awkwardly, saying little more than, "Sleep well, girl," before retreating. But Sarah's eyes would shine at his presence, and she would whisper, "Good night, Pa." That small exchange, clumsy as it was, began to stitch their bond back together, Anna noticed. She saw the way Sarah's shoulders straightened, her smile brighter when her father spoke even a handful of words to her. And she saw, too, how Caleb lingered more often in the kitchen, listening quietly as Sarah chattered about her lessons, or as Anna told her stories of faraway towns. He was still a man of silence, but the silence was softer now, no longer a wall, but a bridge slowly being built. Yet one night, the dam finally cracked. It was after supper, the sky painted deep indigo, the air heavy with the scent of rain. Sarah had gone to bed, tired from helping Anna with chores. Caleb remained at the table, staring into his coffee as Anna cleared the dishes. The room glowed with lamplight, shadows dancing on the wooden walls. Anna broke the quiet first. "She's happier now," she said gently. "She feels safe." Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned the mug in his hands, unable to meet her eyes. She shouldn't have had to beg for that. Anna froze mid-step, a plate in her hand. She set it down slowly. "You heard her that night?" Caleb nodded once. His voice was gravel low. "Every word." The silence that followed was thick. Anna's heart ached as she looked at him, a man carved of stone, carrying a weight no one else could see. Finally, she spoke. "Then you know she doesn't need to fear being left again. She needs you to tell her she's safe. She needs to hear it from you." Caleb's hand clenched around the mug. His throat burned with words long buried, words he had swallowed every night since his wife died. He had thought keeping them locked away was strength, but it had only left his daughter desperate enough to ask to be taken instead of losing Anna. He set the mug down hard, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Rising, he paced to the window, staring out into the night. The storm clouds were rolling in, thunder grumbling low across the plains. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, tired, worn, haunted. "I don't know how," he admitted at last, his voice raw. "I don't know how to say the things she needs. I never did, not with her, not even with her ma. I thought if I kept steady, if I kept the ranch alive, that'd be enough." Anna stepped closer, her voice gentle but steady. "Caleb, she doesn't need a strong rancher. She needs her father. She doesn't care about your words being perfect. She just needs to hear them." Caleb turned then, his eyes meeting hers. For the first time, his walls truly cracked. The pain in his gaze was unguarded, laid bare. "And if I fail her again?" Anna held his stare, her eyes glistening. "Then you stand up and try again. That's what fathers do. That's what love is." The room fell into silence, but this silence was different. No longer the heavy, suffocating kind. It was charged, alive, a silence filled with unspoken truths. Caleb's chest rose and fell as though each breath was a battle. Finally, he nodded, a small, broken gesture, but one that carried the weight of surrender. He was ready, not fully, not easily, but ready, to break the silence that had ruled his life for far too long. And outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, washing the earth clean once more. The storm that had threatened all evening broke just before midnight. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolled like drums across the plains, and the wind howled against the shutters. Inside the house, Sarah startled awake, fear tightening her chest. But this time, instead of running to Anna's room, she crept down, the hall toward her father's. The door was cracked open. Caleb sat on the edge of his bed, boots still on, staring out the window at the storm. His broad shoulders were hunched, his face lit by flashes of lightning. Sarah hesitated in the doorway, clutching her blanket to her chest. "Pa?" she whispered. Caleb turned at once, his hard features softening. "Come here, girl." She rushed forward, climbing into his arms without a word. He held her close, his rough hands steadying her trembling frame. For a long while they sat in silence, the storm raging outside while another storm swirled inside Caleb's chest. Then, finally, he found his voice. "Sarah," he began, the word heavy, thick with years of silence. "I need you to listen close." She tilted her head, her wide eyes searching his. Caleb swallowed hard. The words felt strange on his tongue, but once started, they came like a flood breaking through a dam. "I've been a fool," he said softly. "I thought being strong meant keeping quiet. Thought if I just worked the land, kept food on the table, that'd be enough. But it wasn't. Not for you, not for me." His throat tightened, but he forced himself to go on. "You don't ever need to beg me to stay, Sarah. I ain't going nowhere. Not ever. You're my little girl, and I love you more than this whole ranch, more than the land, more than my own life." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She pressed her face into his chest, sobbing, not from fear this time, but from the joy of hearing the words she had longed for. Caleb held her tighter, rocking gently, his own eyes burning, though no tears fell. From the doorway, Anna watched, her hand pressed against her heart. She had risen when she heard the storm and had followed Sarah down the hall, but she stopped when she saw what was unfolding. Her breath caught at the sight of Caleb, hard, stoic Caleb, finally breaking his silence, finally giving his daughter the one gift she needed most. When Sarah's tears slowed and sleep began to claim her, Caleb carried her back to her room. He tucked her in carefully, brushing a damp curl from her cheek. He leaned down and whispered, "I love you, my girl, always." Sarah, half asleep, smiled. For the first time, her dreams were not haunted by loss or fear. They were filled with the safety of her father's words. Caleb turned then and found Anna waiting in the hallway, her eyes shimmering with unspoken emotion. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the storm's rumble filling the silence between them. Then Caleb stepped closer. "You were right," he said gruffly. "About everything." Anna shook her head gently. "I only reminded you of what was already there." He studied her face, every line of it etched with strength and kindness. "I don't reckon I've said it enough, but I'm grateful, Anna. For her, for me, for this house feeling alive again." Her smile was soft, trembling at the edges. Sometimes, Caleb, love doesn't need grand words. It just needs to be spoken at all. For a man who had lived so long in silence, speaking even that much felt like a beginning. And as the storm outside quieted, the house filled not just with the sound of rain, but with something brighter, hope. That night, the McGraw Ranch found its peace again. A little girl no longer wondered if she'd be left behind. A rancher no longer lived locked inside his silence. And a woman who had once sought refuge had found a place where her heart could rest. Together, at last, they were not just survivors of loss, they were a family reborn.